Today, I'm excited to welcome Mike Pell. Mike is the inventor of PDF and Acrobat at Adobe, with over 20 patents to his name. He currently leads Microsoft's Global Innovation Program in New York City and drives transformative projects in design and technology. He's also the author of Visualizing Business, The Age of Smart Information, and Envisioning Holograms. He's also a TEDx speaker and contributor. Mike, it's great to have you today.
Oh, it's great to be here. Can't wait to talk.
Awesome. Well, we have some great topics and questions for today. I would love to know a little bit about the sort of story, the ideas, what sparked creating and building and inventing PDF and Acrobat at Adobe. What was that like?
That's a great story. It's also a story of the exact opposite of all the business advice you ever get. People tell you you have to research your topic and get a lot of data and have market research and be absolutely sure there's ROI. Well, many, many, many years ago, John Warnock, who was the head of Adobe, had this crazy idea that he could solve an impossible problem. At that time, you could not send a document between a Mac and a PC and a Unix machine and have it look the same. It literally was impossible. They looked completely horrible. But John knew that he could solve it using some of the technology that he had developed at Adobe for PostScript, which was a resolution independent language. And so I was part of a startup that was just acquired by Adobe, and he asked us to basically go sit in the corner for 2 weeks and figure out how to do this impossible thing. And the fact is, we did figure out how to do it really well, and that turned into Acrobat and PDF, which went on to change global business. But it was against all of the business, principles that you always learn. John believed that if you built a better mousetrap, people would come, which is, usually terrible advice, right? When you're trying to do something that is going to return and, shareholder value. But we just did it, and we figured out how to do it very, very quickly. And back then we didn't know that it was going to change the world in the way that it did. But we sort of knew that we could do something very, very close to what his vision was. And so we just went off and did it.
Well, I definitely love the products, and it's funny how even you said 20 plus years back, even today, like I use Windows, Mac, iPad, iPhone. My wife has a Chromebook at school where she's a teacher, and being able to like look at just a piece of content, it changes everywhere. So anyway, thanks
Yeah, I mean,
thanks for making that product.
yeah, well, I literally hacked the very first PDF file together over 30 years ago and made a little viewer for it. But at that time, it was really just an experiment.
That's incredible. Let's talk a little bit about your creative process. You've been granted over 20 U.S. patents, which is 20 more than I have personally. But I'd love to know a little bit about your personal approach to innovation, how you kind of get some of these ideas flowing, where they come from, where do you go? Is there like a place, kind of a mindset? How do you
Mhm.
get there?
Well, I'll tell you the truth. I'm that type of person who does my best work when I'm right up against a deadline. So I will often personally just, do it just in time. And I find that I do my best work that way. I wouldn't suggest that for everybody necessarily, but that's what works for me. And, I also found that you really cannot innovate on demand. You can't be brilliant on demand all the time. You can try. And what helps is practicing, just like anything else, learning a musical instrument, doing anything that requires a high degree of skill. If you just try to do it every day, just try to practice in some way, it'll be easier when you are up against those deadlines to really step in and perform.
Hmm. Amazing. That definitely makes sense. I mean, I have a couple kids who are just starting to learn how to play instruments, and they find it very frustrating initially, but over the course of a half a year or a year, they no longer are worried about the practice, and they start to enjoy that journey of being able to play a new song or show to their friend or something. So that's very interesting. The practice part of it, I think, is pretty
Yeah,
compelling.
and they, maybe whether they realize it or not, the failing is part of the learning, right? Like I always say, I don't like romanticizing failure. I think when people say fail fast, that's ridiculous because nobody wants to fail. But the fact is, if you pay attention, you do learn a lot when things don't turn out. And hopefully that's happening for them and they're getting some encouragement and things improve over time.
Yeah, for sure. Did you find that, maybe in the beginning of your career, as you're kind of figuring out how to be creative, or maybe you sort of always started there. But as you were beginning this process, did you have to have mentors or folks around you that helped ground you when you did have these failures or frustrations? Like, how did you bounce back when you weren't finding creativity?
Mm. Well, I'll take that in two parts. First, I was an artist when I was a little kid, so I was always very creative, always had a great imagination, loved science fiction and science in general. So I was always that curious kid who would just try to figure things out. But as I got older and I realized that I did need some help professionally, sort of shaping, I did go out and try to find some mentors that were the top of their field, people who were super accomplished that I felt like I really could learn from. But also along the way, I just found inspiration in some of the most amazing people in the industry, whether it was Steve Jobs or, George Lucas or, people out of the music industry. I was just so inspired by their ability to create and to act at such a high level, to be able to bring things to life in the ways that nobody else had ever done. That was my inspiration and my sort of drive behind the creativity.
Hmm. As you progressed in your career, you mentioned one of your startups was acquired. You've worked at some great companies. You're currently leading the global innovation program in New York for Microsoft. Can you walk us through a little bit about what that means for Microsoft, what kinds of projects you've shipped or failed, and like what you're kind of excited about working on or working towards for the future?
Mhm. The Microsoft Garage is the company's worldwide innovation program, and it's really meant for employees to be able to take their ideas and their passion and move them forward in some way. And so, what we do is it's not so much an accelerator or an incubator, it's really a program to support what people are already doing, which is being curious and experimenting and just trying things out. The garage team, which is very small, we have 14 garages around the world, but we run the world's biggest hackathon, which we just finished. The Microsoft Global Hackathon is, an incredible event for people to be able to do what they need to do to, try something out or learn or join a team of other people who have the same ideas as them and do something very, very quickly. In 2 or 3 days, they hack together some kind of a working prototype, make a video, and then we have had a tremendous amount of projects created every year for the last 10 years. And people love this type of event because they're meeting folks that they would never work with normally from different parts of the world and are getting experience and also exposure to different ideas and thinking and cultures to be able to have that creative spark. So that's pretty amazing for us as a company to be able to keep growing that, year after year after year, to really get everybody accustomed to the idea that hacking is for everyone. It's not just for engineers or marketers or designers. It's really for everyone, sales, HR, people who are out in the field to just take their best ideas and try to move them forward. So that's been a lot of fun for us to be able to do that.
I love that because every time we do a hackathon, whether it's when I was at Facebook or my first company Dyn, or even now at Zeit, I find that the engineers and developers often come sort of intuitively understanding what a hackathon is and like how to approach it because they've done it before, whether it's in college or whatever. But so many of our salespeople or customer support folks, you kind of have to spell it out initially and help guide them through some ideas or approaches. One thing that I often do is I will show them, I'm like, hey, I might not be able to do this thing, but I can certainly draw something and then work with a designer and then work with an engineer or come up with a presentation. And I think it really helps people understand that, like, even if they feel like maybe they're not creative or they're not technical, they can at least approach it in a way that gets them closer to that outcome that you want to have.
Yeah, absolutely. You're right. Hacking is for everyone. And most people somehow think it's only for the technical, but it's not. Some of the best ideas come from people who are close to customers, who are close to how the internal processes work. And so that's really the big revelation is that, taking your idea and trying to move it forward in some way is for every single person in the organization.
When you talk about it being one of the biggest hackathons, is this just to help me understand, just out of curiosity, is it sort of all the Microsoft campuses? Is it like Microsoft campuses plus, I don't know, colleges come together? How does that kind of work and function?
It's for Microsoft employees worldwide. So we don't limit it to our locations. People hack from their homes, like wherever they happen to, living around the world. We do invite in some of our customers. And so we've been doing that probably the last 5 or 6 years. And that's a lot of fun for them to be able to see, behind the curtain and see how Microsoft innovates for themselves. But no, it really spans boundaries, and borders and facilities. It's really about getting every single employee to try to get involved and just to chase their passion.
I think just to kind of have additional thought there. My boss at Facebook, he worked at Microsoft for 10, 15 years. And one of my coworkers, my peers, also was a Microsoft guy. And it was really interesting because they were so clearly so much more customer focused than I felt like I was. And over time, I became more focused, in that direction. So it's interesting to hear you talk about a hackathon with customers. I don't remember any Facebook hackathon ever having customers at it. So anyway, that's really cool. I love that.
It's one of the best things because employees often don't get a chance to be that close to real customers, so just exchange ideas and understand more about their culture and what they're trying to do. That's great for us. And the same, goes for them. They love to see behind the curtain and how innovation really works at Microsoft.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. So we've talked a little bit about innovation, creation, design. Obviously, there's technology. One of the folks that I talked with a couple weeks ago, he was a Google engineer that I worked with for a while at one of our startups. He talked about how early on in his career, he felt like engineering was something that was basically just you find the thing you got to fix and you go and fix it, and then you just keep fixing things. And I think he sort of adjusted his perspective over time to understand that it's more about helping customers. All engineering is helping customers, just like product design and and sales and all these kinds of things. I'd love to understand how you think about design, creativity, technology, how they kind of intersect, and because I think sometimes folks on, I don't know if you want to call it either side, whether they're technology and engineering and product, or design and I don't know, creative kind of folks. Sometimes it seems like they're at odds with each other, not on purpose, but they just kind of get there. What's been your experience, and how do you kind of get them to drive towards the right direction?
Well, the first thing is I'll say we have data going back 10 years of running the Microsoft Global Hackathon showing that the teams who were, recognized as winners in their categories of our executive challenges, they're all very diverse teams. And I don't mean diversity of race and gender, I mean diversity of background and their roles that they play and what disciplines they come from and what life experiences they have. So we know that the key to a successful team is having that diversity of thought, having different roles represented. So all of our teams at Microsoft are cross-disciplinary on purpose, right? You have to have, different points of view to be successful in anything. And what I found is when you really start to talk to people from other disciplines, nobody really has that different, point of view than each other. They may look at it through a different lens, but everybody's working for the same company. They all are trying to serve the customer, as you just said, in some way, whatever their business happens to be. Whether it's even education, right, where you're a university, or high school trying to get a better student to come out the other end. Everybody's working towards the same end. The problem is that, we sometimes get a bit too focused and a bit too myopic on our own job. And what we've tried to do over the years is try to help other people to understand, what the bigger goals are. And I always tell people you have to really understand from someone else's perspective why they might share, their views in a certain way or why they don't share what you think is important. So you just have to put yourself on the other side of the table sometimes and to try to really understand in a non-judgmental way, why do they have that opinion or why are they bringing this up? Why is this so important? And once you can start to do that, you'll realize that, maybe there's some things that you didn't really take into consideration. So that's at the heart of everything we're doing these days is collaboration. And to be a great collaborator, it really starts with listening and understanding what other people are trying to communicate, what is important to them, and then finding some way to get the right thing done, for the customer while still sort of pulling in everybody's superpowers.
Hmm. I love the idea of pulling in everyone's superpowers. I just went to Comic Con last week, and I have 20 little figurines sitting right next to me. It's the Justice League and the Fellowship of the Ring. So that's
Ah,
always on my
very
mind.
cool. I like that. Yeah, and by the way,
You
that is not easy to do. Like it's easy for me to say, and I lived through a lot of very difficult situations and teams. But if you, like we were saying earlier, if you practice, talking to people and listening and trying to get them to see your viewpoint, it gets easier over time.
Yeah, I 100% agree. I think one of the experiences I had just, early on in my career is I'm in sales, I'm in account management, I'm in business development. And it felt, going back, it felt like I didn't know the engineering team. But when we did these hackathons, all of a sudden, like exactly like you described, oh, same company, same team, kind of objectively the same goals. And you find those ways to work. One thing I started doing is I started running with my engineering team,
Mhm.
and we'd be running in San Francisco or New Hampshire, and we'd start talking about customer problems. It was never like, Scott, tell me about your code. It wasn't like, tell me about your approach to sales, but we started, we got that focus on the customer.
Mhm.
Tell me a little bit about, you seem like you've got to be a pretty busy guy. You mentioned earlier when we talked, you've got family, you've worked at Microsoft for quite a long time.
Mhm.
You're innovating and creating great new products and tools, but you also write books. You've written three, and I think I don't know if you just work all the time or you just have infinite capacity or how that works. So you've got a time turner like Hermione, but you wrote this one book, for example, Envisioning Holograms. And I'd love to know some of your views on some of the future of communication and how they've evolved through your writing. Because
Mhm.
writing is one of those things that's very introspective, and I think you learn a lot about yourself and
Mhm.
presumably the audience that you're writing for. But love to hear a little bit about the book and some of the inspiration behind it and what you've learned.
Yeah, well, the first thing is when you write a book, you learn that you don't really like writing. No. No, actually, you have to like writing or you would never finish a book. I do. And it's funny, the new book I wrote called Visualizing Business, one of the very first pages in the book says, none of this book was written using ChatGPT. Why? Because I
Very
like writing.
smart.
Yeah. But in the future, that doesn't mean that people won't write books using generative AI or other things. There's certainly great tools, and there's nothing wrong with figuring out, how the tools can help you in that way. But yeah, for me, first on the time thing, many people have always told me that, you have time for the things that you want to have time for, right? You will make time. You will find a way to do things that are really important to you. And I think that that's true. Whether you realize it consciously or not, we all make time for the things that we care about, whether that's watching a game on TV or running or like spending time with your kids, like whatever it is, we all subconsciously or consciously make the time for things that are really the most important. Now, a lot of us get stuck in a trap of feeling like we're on this hamster wheel and we have to check our email, we have to, do our social media posts, we have to do this, and you don't really have to do those, but you do have to think about what's important and prioritize. So that's one thing. For me, writing and visioning holograms is something I did in 2017. That's right when the Microsoft HoloLens just came out. And I'm a 3D guy. I've always worked in 3D, and I've always had a lot of vision. I've always known sort of what was coming next because I've always spent my career at the intersection of technology, business, and design. So I've sort of see things from many different perspectives. So that book was really to help other people to think about how they might get involved with spatial computing, as it's called now, or mixed reality. Coming from a different background of maybe 2D design or marketing or engineering, where you don't have access to that type of hardware or that type of system, it's just a different mindset. And I wanted to write something which actually became a textbook for a while to help people to sort of go from the way that they see the world now and the tool sets that we use now to how it could be, which will be a much more immersive future. Not having to have everybody be in a VR headset, as you just saw recently with the Meta, demonstration. I mean, we will all have access to technologies. There's also great technology from a company called Leia, where you basically can see something that looks like an IMAX 3D with no headset, no glasses. It breaks the plane and is very convincing for engineering and entertainment. So we will all be able to see things and utilize spatial computing in our everyday work.
Hmm. I just as a quick aside, I love everything that comes out in IMAX for the most part. So the idea of having a personalized IMAX sounds incredible.
Yeah.
If we can go back just for a second, I would be super interesting to hear your perspective on writing. One of the things that I keep, so I have some nieces and nephews that are just approaching college age. My mom lives in a college town, so she meets with hundreds of students, and they keep talking about how professors, for example, are saying we're not going to write an essay outside of class because of some of these generative tools. We're going
Hmm.
to do it in class, and we're going to do it more manually. And I'd be, interested as someone who's written some books. Like, how do you view generative AI in the context of those books? Is it like, do you ever use it to help you ideate on something, or to grammatically review, or to propose some approach, or are you like on a typewriter just driving this book?
Yeah. Well, first, I think that that's a great idea to have students write in class. I mean, like, I think doing anything on demand is incredibly useful. It builds a lot of skills. It helps you to understand how to manage time, how to think on your feet, how to focus and get things done. It may be super difficult for kids these days to be able to do that, but I think that's a great idea. But I think it's a really bad idea for educators to think that they can keep students away from ChatGPT or generative AI, Microsoft Copilot, by making them write in class and not accepting things from outside. That's ridiculous, right? Because the kids all have access. We all have access to it. I always make the example that when the pocket calculator first came out, people absolutely lost their minds. They thought this was the end of mathematics. No one would ever know how to add or subtract or multiply ever again. And the truth is, here we are, whatever, 40, 50 years later, it would be silly to not use a calculator to do something, right? Like if you have something that's non-trivial to figure out, like why would you not use a calculator? I think that generative AI is exactly the same thing. It will be ridiculous to not utilize such a powerful and creative tool to do some of the things that we need to do. Now, that said, there's an incredible amount of value that people get from reasoning and by researching and considering and reconsidering and arguing and having to defend points of view. I mean, these are all things you do as you write. You may be doing it in your head, or you may be doing it with your editor or collaborators, but that's a very useful set of things. Just because you didn't physically write the first draft of something, maybe you asked Microsoft Copilot or ChatGPT to do it for you, it doesn't mean that you're not involved in the writing process, because now you become a reviewer and an editor and someone who has to figure out how to communicate your ideas clearly. And frankly, if you're, any writer worth their salt, you have a point of view and you have a perspective and you have a voice, and you do not want to give that away to anything, right? You don't want to give that to the machine. The machine may learn your voice and your attitude and your lens of looking at the world eventually, and maybe that'll be a time savings over over the years that we start to really use this in our everyday work. But for right now, I think it's great that anybody, students or workers, or people that are just trying it to experiment. I think it's great that they have a new tool that can help them to see things that maybe they would have never thought of. We use that quite a bit on the design side of things to create what we used to call, like a mood board, right? Like just creating a bunch of ideas to just sort of inspire you from a color palette perspective or layout or typography, whatever it was you were going for, like a basic feel. That can be done in seconds, and where that used to take days, or weeks to sort of pull that together. So that's an incredible help in a lot of different fields, is to get that jump start. And in writing, I think the same can be true. Hey, Copilot, give me 5 examples of how we might use design, moving forward with spatial computing. And guess what? 15 seconds later, you have 5 ideas. That's not a bad thing.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. I love the comparison to a mood board, because I think that's great, because it's very visual. It takes a long time to pull together, or it potentially could in the past. and now you have the opportunity to just jump right into. I've used for writing blog post content, for example. I'll
Mhm.
say, hey, I'm looking to write a blog post today. Can you help me? And I actually put in the last, I don't know, 100 blog posts that I've written. And
Mhm.
it'll say, well, you've written about these 6 topics. Should we write about one of those today? And then we kind of
Mhm.
go through it. And it's
Yeah.
so great. It's like having a friend there to talk to you.
Yeah. The really interesting magic trick is that some of the models can actually write in the voice of someone that has a lot of work that it's been trained on. And so you can ask, like in a fun kind of experimental way, it's like, hey, could you give me this paragraph for my blog post, in a very Shakespearean type of way? And you'll get back something that's, pretty amusing, but also pretty good.
Right. Yeah, absolutely right. Based on some of the answers that you've shared today and kind of your, I don't know, pretty measured approach, I feel like you'd probably be a great mentor. And I imagine that during your time at Microsoft and other companies you've worked with, you've had the opportunity to mentor some folks. What's been your approach to mentorship? Like, how do you think about being a mentor or helping others around you?
Mhm. I do a lot of mentoring and I enjoy it quite a bit. I think initially when you're early in your career, you think that you have to have a mentor because that's how you're going to get ahead. Just to be honest, right? We all think, oh, I'm going to go
Totally
find
right.
some VP to mentor me, so I'll become a VP someday. And that works sometimes. And very often you're going to get great advice and great examples, and you know, just I would say it's a good thing for everybody to try out. But I wouldn't do it for that reason. I would do it because you actually want to try to learn something new, not that you think it's going to somehow get you ahead. The second part of that is for me, I've changed the way that I think about mentoring because I used to just do it because I sort of felt compelled to give back. I was at a part of my career where I had a lot of experience and I had no problem sharing those things, good or bad. I had lots of failings and lots of things that didn't work out. And so I would share that with people who were interested. But I didn't really consider how important mentoring is and coaching to the person that you're doing it for. So often I wouldn't necessarily give a lot of weight or gravity to the things I was saying. I was just giving them advice. I was just sharing my experiences. But it turns out it's really important to them, and they're listening very carefully. And as a mentor or coach, you have a very big responsibility, and you should take it really seriously. Not that you shouldn't have fun, and not that you shouldn't enjoy the time together, but just realize that that person is looking to you for career advice or like very practical advice on how to proceed, and just sort of think about it through that lens.
Oh, I love that. I was talking with the president of a company called One Password recently, and he mentions that when it comes to mentoring, he finds that his approach, whatever it is, at the end of it, he feels like it's so important to him to pay it forward or to share and to be a mentor
Mhm.
because he received so much early on in his career. And in all the times that he felt like he was sort of like wading through darkness or this like deep, dark, scary place, um, all these folks who offered help to him, he wants to be able to do the same, which I feel like I could definitely sense from you as well.
Yeah, I wrote a post recently talking about how I think the mentor, in a lot of cases, learns a lot more and gets a lot more out of the experience than the mentee. And so there's that part of it too.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's talk a little bit about working in Microsoft's a pretty big company now. It's been a bigger company for a while. You guys are on a tear right now. Just it's an incredible business. You have a great CEO. I've owned shares of Microsoft I think since I was like 14, and
Huh. Well,
I'd
then
love.
why are you doing this podcast? You should be off like sailing
I
somewhere.
should have put more money in. I think I started doing more indexing rather than direct
Yeah.
investing. I'd love to know a little bit about how you think about building, shipping, maintaining agility, speed within a because I think everybody thinks of a big business, a corporate environment as slow and terrible. It doesn't seem like Microsoft's that way, but how do you make sure you stay fast, nimble, quick?
Well, you were right the first time. Microsoft used to be very slow, and we did things on the yearly basis or like multiple years. It would take multiple years to create a new version of Windows or Office. And we sort of learned over time that we really did have to speed up the pace at which we worked. And then the world started to accelerate the pace of what they were doing to be, just so fast that we had to go on to more of a continuous cycle like you find now on the cloud with lots of cloud companies. But what we did is 10 years ago, we got a new CEO, Satya Nadella, and Satya had been a longtime Microsoft guy. And he really knew that in order to do better work and for us to feel like we were doing our best work, we needed to change our culture. And the change that had to happen had to go from us being very focused and concerned with our own projects to really picking our heads up and looking around and looking for opportunities to collaborate with other teams. And so, in the process of doing that, our culture became one of being curious and experimental. And so that really, at its heart, helped us to go faster because we were all, out, not only looking at our own stuff, but sort of looking around, and we were able to leverage what other teams were doing in a lot of cases. And that's what helped us, I think, ultimately to become better at working much faster.
Makes a lot of sense. I really only have two more questions for you today, Mike. So one is just sort of on, I guess, I think you talked about the practice of creativity. I'd be curious to know, do you ever feel exhausted? Do you feel like you need to refuel? You need to take a break from being creative, or like you just feel at the low end of the energy that you might need for it? And how do you get it back? Maybe that question is sort of similar to what happens when you're burnt out.
Yeah. Okay. So what are you saying, Scott? I look like a wreck?
No, definitely not.
Well, I know. I mean, I have been going morning and night for weeks now. I've had so many things: the Microsoft Global Hackathon, UN Hackathon, UN General Assembly, just like all of these events, back to back, and it gets to be a lot. But honestly, I have been quite fortunate to work in a job that I absolutely love. I love meeting people. I love being out talking to our customers. I get to be highly creative every day. I'm actually required to be highly creative every day. And so I think when you have an opportunity to work in that way, it doesn't really feel like work. So like, yes, I'm tired, and yes, I would love to go off and have a real vacation somewhere. And, I do find times, I'll just tell you, I love to just sit sometimes. Like I don't get to do it very often, but there's nothing more than I love than reading a magazine, just like sitting down and just relaxing, like just, or like watching, a couple episodes on Netflix. I love to do nothing. And as an artist, as a creative person, we have to somehow have time to do nothing because you know very well that's when a lot of your best ideas come, right? When you're not on the clock, when you're just off like running or just, doing something other than what you're supposed to be doing. That's when the real creativity. So I guess the way that I recharge is trying my best to do nothing for a little while and then get back to it.
Totally makes sense. I think you're totally right. I think when I have my best ideas, the ideas that I can really think through, it's usually when I'm building something with my hands. I love woodworking,
Mhm.
or playing ice hockey, and I take a breath after sprinting for a minute and a half.
Mhm.
So sitting and doing nothing. I feel like Jerry Seinfeld would love this idea.
Yeah. No, and the fact is, even when you're sitting there like or walking or whatever you're doing, you're always, processing something, whether consciously or unconsciously. So it's it's just important to not be, in the grind of what you do all the time. That can't be good for anyone.
Yeah, for sure. Well, last question for you. I think it was a month ago. You spoke at TEDx, and
Mhm.
you talked about what you called the moment of clarity. And I'd love to know a little bit more about that, and what that also, what the experience was like to speak at one of those, and maybe ultimately, what was the concept, and what did you hope that people left understanding or thinking or beginning to think about?
The moment of clarity is something that all of us experience. It's the exact second when everything becomes super clear. It's as if you understood it for the first time, and it was so clear that you knew exactly what to do about it. And that happens across the board. It could be when you're cooking and you realize, exactly like what temperature you had to do this and how long you had to prepare something. And all of a sudden you're like locked in, and you will never make any mistakes again because you know how it has to be. Or in mathematics or physics, when a really difficult concept, all of a sudden it just makes sense. Like now you know how to answer the problem. Now you know how to move forward. So I've always been fascinated with when that happens for people. And it turns out it's not completely random, but it's not predictable either. And so this book that I wrote, Visualizing Business, talks about how to engineer the moment of clarity. We have the technologies and approaches. We know enough about brain science and learning to actually help people to the moment of clarity. And it's not rocket science. It's just a set of things that we have to do in a certain order. So as a communicator, I always say I'm a professional storyteller. I like to be able to get people to the moment of clarity. And so when I prepared to do the TEDx talk, I had to use my own techniques. How am I going to get an audience of people who probably have never read my book? They don't know anything about me. I step on stage for 10 minutes, and how do I get them to the moment of clarity really fast? And the way that I structure, I won't ruin it if anybody ever goes out to watch the video, but I did the whole talk trying to illustrate, what I was talking about, trying to get the moment of clarity to happen for people so they would get it. And they go, oh, okay, now I know what you're talking about. I'll just tell you, between us, the TEDx format and the TED format are very exact. TED is a very successful conference for a reason. They have figured out, how people can consume content very quickly in a particular format and retain it. And so TEDx is, half the amount of time. TED is 18 minutes, TEDx is 10 minutes. You still have the same constraints. You stand on the red circle, you speak. They want you to be incredibly well practiced so that it feels, like you're getting right to exactly what you've got to get to. And that's the exact opposite of what I normally do. I do a lot of speaking, I do a lot of presentations, but I love the challenge of being in the moment. I love not over preparing and over practicing with things because I just personally enjoy being right there with the audience and going back and forth and just sort of doing what feels right and in the moment. And the TED format is an excellent format, but it is not that. So it was a real challenge for me. I had to stretch myself, and as Satya would say, use growth mindset to be open to the idea of doing what I do in a very different way. And so, as always, I think I could have done a bit better, but it turned out okay.
I think going back to your comment a minute ago about Scott, am I burned out? It sounds like you're completely the opposite. You're someone who looks for uncomfortable opportunities to do new things. So anyway, thanks for being here with me today and taking the time to talk about your incredible career. It's been a pleasure to talk with you.
No, thank you, Scott. Can't wait to talk again soon.
All right. See you, Mike.
See ya.